Good evening, everybody. It's great to see the room filling up really quickly here. We are going to start in just a couple of minutes, so we give people plenty of time to join us this evening. Again, if you're just joining us tonight, thanks for being here. We have a lot of really important information to share with you tonight and want to make sure that we can get everybody in that would like to join us. So we're going to wait just one more minute before we get started. Well, we're at 6:46 and we've got plenty of information to share tonight. So we are going to go ahead and get started. Thanks for coming and being here virtually with me tonight. My name is Tim Gross. I am the principal at Hazelbrook, and I am here tonight to help share some really important information with you about our plans for reopening schools on April 19th. And so I hope that tonight we can get you all the information that you're needing to be able to help make some decisions about what that reopening looks like for you and your family. Next slide, please, Thor, would be great. Thanks, Thor. So tonight we have Vilma Madrigal is here, and we are lucky to have her helping us with interpretation in Spanish. And so if you prefer to follow along in Spanish with a simultaneous interpretation, you can click on that interpretation button, which should be at the bottom bar on your screen, and that will allow you to follow along in Spanish. And Vilma, I really appreciate you. That's a really hard job to do simultaneous interpretation, and just thank you immensely for being here with us tonight. Next slide, please, Thor. Also, in addition to myself tonight, Ben Burkhardt is here. He's our associate principal at Hazelbrook. And also we have special guest Andy Van Fleet, the principal at Fowler Middle School. And they're going to be fielding questions in the Q&A and providing as many live answers as we can as we go tonight. So a big thank you also to Ben and Andy for being here with us. Next slide, please, Thor. So as we move through the presentation tonight, there are really two things that I want to make sure that we cover and that we get out to you as families. The first is that you're going to have a choice starting tonight about whether you want your child to be attending school in our in-person hybrid schooling model, or whether you want your child to continue in 100% online beginning April 19th. And I want to provide with you all the information that you may need to help make that decision. Second, I want to provide just some details and logistics around how you can make that decision later tonight from the technical side. So those are the two things that we're hoping to cover tonight. If you are interested in a lot more detail than I am going to share with you tonight, you can go to our Hazelbrook website, which is listed there at the bottom of your screen, and you'll be able to check out the state guidance on what it looks like to open schools. You'll also be able to see our community resources around response to COVID-19. You'll be able to see our specific blueprint for how we're going to operate when we reopen, detail by detail. And also there on the question mark is a list of frequently asked questions that we've been fielding that we're populating as we go. And so if you're interested in going through with a lot of detail around how we're opening and doing things, feel free to visit our website and click on one of those buttons at the top of the screen there. Next, please, Thor. So as we jump in here, starting on April 19th, students are going to have a couple options for how they come to school with us. The first one is going to be hybrid instruction, which means that of a 5-day week, students will spend 2 days a week at school. They'll receive their core instruction with us at school, and they'll spend 2 days a week online doing their electives, PE, a reading class if they have it, and independent study and homework the other 2 days. Wednesday will continue just as it is right now while we're in distance learning, with a community check-in in the morning and then independent work throughout the day. We're looking at having our A to L students with last names A through L. They will be in school on Mondays and Thursdays with their core classes, and our students with last name M to Z will be in school Tuesdays and Fridays. We intend to stick to those guidelines and follow those guidelines as we go forward here, as you make decisions. Next slide, please, Thor. The other option families will have, if they're not keen on the idea of being with us in a hybrid, will be comprehensive distance learning, or the 100% online only option, which is just like we're doing right now, where students will be able to continue virtually with teachers and learning at home through their iPads for the remainder of the school year. And so when we get to the end of the presentation tonight, we're going to be asking that you as families make a choice between hybrid instruction or that 100% online comprehensive distance learning option. Thanks, Thor. So just to get started, I want to walk through kind of what our schedule is going to look like in those two options. You'll see here on your screen that our school day, first of all, the first few blocks or columns there on your screen are for each of our 6th, 7th, and 8th graders in their in-person hybrid schedule. The far right chunk, those last two columns on the far right, are for students that would continue to stay in CDL and for the days when students are doing their electives from home. What you'll notice is that our school day is going to start at 9 o'clock and our school day is going to end at 2:15. And that's a little different than our traditional school day. And the reason that we're running a 9 o'clock to 2:15 schedule is because of our transportation needs throughout the district. Everything gets coordinated together between our elementaries, middle schools, and high schools, and that's how the puzzle fits. So our school day is looking like a 9 o'clock to 2:15 day. That is when students will start to be dismissed to their buses, excuse me, and I'll talk a little bit more about that process here in a minute, but you'll just see there, that's kind of the general outline of our school day. It's very, very similar to our current schedule, with just some tweaks by 5 minutes or so here or there for in-person transit times between classes, where teachers will be moving from one class to another. But other than that, it's very similar to what we currently have. Next slide, please, Thor. As we come back in person, I just want to be really clear when I say that we have these really clear priorities in this order. The first priority is that we really need to work and operate with the safety of our staff and students in mind. And all of the plans that I'm about to share with you are really designed to make sure that we can open our school safely, and that we're not put in a position to be spreading the coronavirus and leading to cases of COVID-19 in our community. Our second priority, which stands really high above the third, is that our students have now been out of school for a year. And we really need to rebuild the connections that exist between students themselves and also between students and us as adults at the school. And so our second priority is really going to be using the last 9 weeks of the school year to try to rebuild those connections, to get students back and feeling safe in school, and to really support the mental health that many of our students have struggled with over the past year, not being connected to friends and to teachers. And so that will be our second priority. And then third will be the academic content itself. We will be teaching academic content, but using that as a vehicle to really try to rebuild those connections is the way we're looking at things as we come back to school here in the spring. Next slide, please, Thor. As I walk through some safety procedures here and what school is going to look like, it's really, really important that all of us are able to work together to make sure that we can keep everybody safe. And it's going to be really important that the safety starts with all of you at home. We're going to ask that for those of you that choose to come back to school in a hybrid, that every single day before your students come to school, that you screen them and talk to them about how they're feeling. And that means kind of covering the bases of the things that are listed there on the screen to make sure that they're not experiencing any symptoms that could go along with COVID-19. As we know, the best method for prevention is to avoid contact with those that may potentially have coronavirus in their system. So we're going to ask that you do a really thorough screening before students come to school. And if they are showing any symptoms at all, we ask that you keep them home so that we can make sure we're staying safe in the building. Next slide, please. We'll have really specific procedures that are following our state guidance for social distancing and for mask wearing as soon as students get ready to come to school. And when students load the bus, we're going to ask that they line up at the bus stop 6 feet apart with masks on. And as students get on the bus, it's going to be a lot different than we're used to. Students, the first student on the bus will sit in the back of the bus. We'll have one seat or one student per seat on the bus. And as students load, they'll move from the back of the bus forward. Seats will be marked for students so that they know exactly where they can sit to remain as socially distant as possible on that bus. They'll be required to wear a mask the entire time they're on that bus, with one student to a seat. Depending on the size of the bus, that puts us at about 20 to 22 students or so per bus. So about half as many students on a bus as we're normally used to. And we're doing that just to make sure that we're following those guidelines for social distancing. Thanks, Thor. Once students get to school, it's also going to look a little bit different. The buses will unload from the front of the bus to the back, one student at a time, students 6 feet apart. Once students are on campus, they're going to wear their masks throughout the entire day. The only time those masks will come off is at lunchtime, or if they're sneaking a drink of water during the day. We'll have specific unloading zones in the bus area, making sure that we're only unloading 4 buses at any given time. In a normal day, we might unload 10 buses at a time previously, and this is going to be a little different so that we make sure students are not intermingling, as we really need to plan on keeping students to their assigned cohorts, one of those cohorts being the bus itself. As students unload from the bus, they will follow an assigned route to their first class. And so that route will not be straight in the front doors of the school. Instead, every single classroom in our school is going to have a unique route to get to their classroom, most likely around the outside of the building, so that we can maintain that safety. We know it's safer outside than in, and we can maintain that social distancing a lot easier around the outside. And so students will move around the outside of the building to their first class. And when they arrive, they'll receive a visual health screening from their teacher, who will greet them at the door before they move in and follow our procedures to come in the building and start class. So that arrival is just going to look really significantly different from what students are used to experiencing if they've been at Hazelbrook before. Thanks, Thor. When students come into class, after the teacher conducts a visual screening, students will sanitize their hands as they come in, and then they'll move to the sink where they'll wash their hands. And then every student will be seated at a desk with all of our desks 6 to 9 feet apart. And everyone will be wearing masks in the classroom. The teacher will be wearing a mask. Up on the screens in front of students will be dividers to try to reduce the movement of aerosols if they were to escape masks from students. Every single student is going to have their own set of supplies, their own water bottle, paper, pencils, binders, so on and so forth. We're not able to have any common items that are going to be shared for the sake of not transmitting any sort of things that could be passed from hands or faces. And when it comes to the end of classes, students will not move through the hallways from class to class. They will remain in that classroom where they are, and instead the teachers will move. And so teachers will transition from one place to another, and students will remain by cohort in their classroom. And that is to follow the guidance of really minimizing the number of contacts that students have in a given day at school. So that will be another change, where students have a home base instead of teachers. Where this will end up in this hybrid in-person model is that our cohorts will be about half of our class sizes that we're used to in person, anywhere from 12 to 17 or 18 students in person in a class. We're used to a lot of times having 25 to 35 students in a class. And so that's going to feel a lot different with half the number of students in a classroom. Next, please, Thor. Thank you. Here is a picture of what that looks like. We have had the opportunity to invite a few of our students back to school with us already to pilot some of these procedures. And what you'll notice is that our students are spaced pretty far apart. They have their own little bubble that they exist in with the teacher far away from them, over 6 feet, and everybody is wearing a mask there in their classrooms. You'll also notice that backpacks are on the ground. We will not be using lockers, as students will not be moving through the hallway. And so students will kind of take their backpack into their space, and that will be their space for the day when they come to school. Next, please, Thor. There are going to be times when students need to move through the hallway, and that could be they need to use the restroom, they need to head to the office, they need to go to the library, so on and so forth. When that happens, we are implementing a new hall pass system that will run through student iPads that really limits access to the hallway to make sure that we do not have very many students interacting with each other throughout the day. And we know that the most likely place for student congregation and spread of germs is potentially the restroom. And so what will happen is every single one of our cohorts will be assigned a specific restroom that they'll use if they need to use it throughout the day. And our electric hall pass system will limit the number of students that can use that restroom to one at a time. So as a student fills out a hall pass to use the restroom, that will block out other students from being able to go at the same time. Once they return, it'll open up for them to go. That allows us to just kind of control the flow of students moving through the hallways into the restrooms to make sure that we're not having students that are congregating or contacting students from other cohorts, as we're really trying to minimize that amount of contact. During lunchtime, we'll be supervising restrooms in that common space to make sure that we're keeping students 6 feet apart and that they're only using specifically labeled stalls to maintain that social distancing in the restroom. Next slide, please, Thor. You know, as I mentioned before, students aren't going to be moving much through the hallways. Mostly teachers will move from class to class. And so if a student does need to move, they'll use a hall pass. We'll label the hallways so that students are walking down the right side of the hallway. That hall pass system will help us determine who's in the hallway and minimizing the number of students that are there. And as students need to move to areas like lunch, we have identified really specific routes that students will travel from their classroom to the area where they're going to eat lunch. Oftentimes that's an outdoor route, again, to minimize cohorts coming in contact with each other in transit through the building. So that movement is just going to look a lot different also as students have experienced in the past as they are walked down to lunch with a teacher to make sure that we're maintaining those distancing guidelines and keeping those cohorts isolated from each other. Next slide, please, Thor. You'll see here on the screen this is a picture of basically what it looks like. We've developed a routing map for every single one of our classrooms in our school. This happens to be for room E3. And you'll see that the solid arrows are those that are determining where students will go once they get off the bus when they arrive at school. And so students will depart the bus, they'll follow that route in those solid black arrows that will take them to their classroom where they will enter through the external exit to their classroom. At the end of the school day, they'll simply follow the reverse of those solid black arrows back to the bus area. You'll see a dotted line there on your screen, and that dotted line is the route that those students will take to their designated lunch area. Some students will eat in the cafeteria, other students will eat in any one of our gyms. And so what will happen is they will follow their teacher to a really specific route that goes to the area where their cohort will eat lunch. In this case, these students would go to area 3C, which is a part of our cafeteria or our commons. And that route really helps make sure that they're the only ones unique to moving that direction for lunch. You'll also see that all of our classrooms will have a specifically assigned restroom. In this case, you see it says E, that stands for the restroom in our Everest hallway. They're labeled in red. So all of our classrooms that where we will have students will have a really specific route map that looks just like this that our students and teachers will follow as they need to move to lunch and to classes and back to the buses or to be picked up or to walk home at the end of the school day. As I alluded to a little bit before, students will be assigned an eating area by cohort. When they come to lunch, it will not be a mix and mingle, much as students are used to. Again, that's because we need to avoid contact between cohorts in case there were to be a positive case. We need to make sure we're minimizing that contact. And so students will be assigned an eating area by their cohort. Those tables in that area will be 8 to 10 feet apart with dividers. Students will remove their masks to eat their lunch. It will look a lot like a classroom looks in terms of students seated at a table apart from others. They will be able to, if they're receiving meal service from us, which is open to all of our students this year, cost-free, they'll be able to grab one of our lunches as they walk in the door to their lunch area. They'll have a seat, take off their mask to eat, and then when they're done eating, they'll slide that mask right back over their face. But there won't be the same movement or congregation around a table as if we're previous to the pandemic. We also won't have microwaves available or common condiment stations simply because we can't share those materials as per guidance from ODE. Students will have lunch for a half an hour in that space. And then after that half an hour, they're their teacher will come and walk them back to class, where they will have a half an hour of structured free time that could potentially involve moving around outside a little bit if the weather is nice, some study time potentially, playing some games potentially, things that are not necessarily a content class, but time for students to just kind of continue to kind of have a calm lunch break as they continue from eating lunch back to the classroom, so they're not in a rapid transition from lunch right back to content classes. Next slide, please, Thor. You'll see here, this is kind of getting into the weeds a little bit, so I apologize, but you'll see here that this is kind of the diagram of all of our lunch areas that have been isolated by cohorts. And this has been set up by, we'll have 3 lunches in our given day. 1 lunch for 6th graders, 1 for 7th graders, 1 for 8th graders. And specific areas of these eating areas will be used at each of those lunches, staggering them to make sure that we can clean and disinfect them in between cohorts, as new cohorts will then come in and use the space. So it looks pretty sophisticated. I promise you it's not as sophisticated as it looks, but it does give us a layout to make sure that we can bring kids into a eating space for their cohort without cross traffic and crossing over cohorts. Next slide, please. When we get to the very end of the school day, what's going to happen is that rather than dismissing students immediately at 2:15 for everyone to go find their bus or their parents or to start walking, we'll have a staggered dismissal. And so students that are walking home will be dismissed via intercom first. They will use their same route that they came in the morning to leave their classroom to the exterior of the building and to start walking home, followed by students that are being picked up. They'll leave the classroom next, following those exterior routes. And then as buses arrive, we will dismiss students to go to their bus, 1 bus at a time, or potentially 4 buses at a time as they arrive. We can't dismiss all students at once that are riding the bus because students will congregate and simply not be, I mean, we know middle school students are very social, and we're not going to be able to create those conditions to avoid that congregation. And so we'll have to dismiss students to those buses, 1 bus at a time. And so that is the way they'll get to their bus, whether they'll follow the same procedures on the bus, keeping those masks on until they get home. Next slide, please, Thor. I know that there are a lot of questions about what the first day of school is going to look like for students that return on April 19th and April 20th. And our 6th graders have never set foot in our building before. And our 7th and 8th graders haven't been back to our building in a year, and it will be over a year by the time we get to this time. And we know that everyone is going to need a reorientation to all of these procedures. And so when students arrive on the 19th or the 20th, we will have students go straight to inside of our track up to our field, where our teachers will be lined up alphabetically, staggered 10 feet apart, with markings for students to hop in line with their cohort immediately on that first day back, where then our teachers will be able to start right away helping train our students on their entry route to get to their classroom, what it looks like to come into the building and to sanitize and then wash your hands, to be assigned a spot in the classroom to go. And so we will run that process on both Monday the 19th and Tuesday the 20th, because even though our 7th and 8th graders have been at school with us, none of them know these procedures that we're going to follow. And so rather than bringing back just 6th graders, we're going to bring back that half of students that choose to be in a hybrid to really start right away and run through what it looks like to do school in a really safe way coming back. So that is our plan for the beginning there. Next slide, please, Thor. So I'm going to pause right here, and I want to check in with Ben and Andy and see if there are any themes that are coming up in the chat. And I'm going to grab a drink of water here as I've been talking to you here for a half an hour. So Ben, anything showing up there? Any themes?
Yeah, there was a few people asking about the bus ride and wondering about students that were in the same household, so siblings, if they were able to ride on the bus together, like in the same seat.
That's a really good question. I think that they could ride together in the same seat if we were really able to clearly identify who the siblings were. I think where that gets tricky sometimes with middle school students is they, especially with masks on where we can't recognize them perfectly, is they may tend to say we're sisters or brothers or whatever and hop in together. So it's most likely that we're going to want to seat students apart in those separate seats as much as possible, just to maintain consistency and structure. I know the guidance from the state would allow us to have them sit together, but I think for simplicity's sake, we'll have them just one student to every seat.
I think in addition to that too, Tim, I think is that I know that the buses are set up so that the seats will stagger back and forth in order to maximize that distance between students. And so if we put two students next to each other, even though they're in the same household, that would put one student closer to another student in another seat. So that's another piece there too that would probably keep us from doing that.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ben.
Another one, do we have a location so that folks are able to get access to and see the bell schedule that was presented?
Yeah, following this presentation tonight, we will post tomorrow morning this slideshow for all of you to look at on our website. So once we finish up this evening, we'll be able to get you connected to have this slideshow, this slide deck itself posted on our website so you can go through and find those slides that have that information that you'd like to review.
Okay, and then a couple of questions that came up that might be good for folks to hear is just if they're screening their students at home on a core day and they keep them at home due to symptoms, what's the process for them being able to complete the work for those classes that they're missing on that day because they're being kept home?
I think that just as if there were to be an absence during school at any time, it would be a matter of reaching out to teachers and finding an arrangement to complete that work in a timely fashion. If we run into a quarantine situation, which I'll talk about here in a little bit, that situation could look a little different. If it's going to be a long-term absence, we may potentially switch students to a 100% online cohort with the same teacher for that period of that quarantine. But if it's just a 1 or 2 day thing to monitor symptoms and the fever disappears and goes away, then we would be in a position to just make those up a day at a time.
And then there was a question about, as they're coming in with cohorts, if a student was identified as being infected, would parents be in the group be notified about the group members in that cohort?
Yes, and I'm gonna get to that place here in a few minutes in another section here. So I am gonna just ask that we hold off on that question here for just a second before we get there. And if I don't address it again later when we get to that section, Ben, just interrupt me and tell me you forgot to answer that.
Okay.
Okay, awesome. Thanks. All right, let's move on to the next session here, which is really about that COVID response. If you could go forward there, Thor. Awesome, thank you. The next piece here is just to kind of review with all of you what it looks like from a school end to navigate if we were to have a positive case of COVID-19 with a student at school. I think we can anticipate that that's a pretty likely scenario at this point. We're hoping the metrics continue to decline so that we're not at risk for that. But I think as long as COVID-19 is in our community, we can anticipate that there may be a case we'll have to deal with here and there. So I want to talk through that a little bit with you. Next slide, please, Thor. So as I mentioned earlier, and I can't reiterate enough, we really need all of our students, if they're not feeling well, to stay home. We know in the past, there are lots of times where we might not be feeling well and we're going to tough it out because it's oftentimes easier to go to school or to work than to stay home and try to figure out how to make it up if we're not there. But I think for the sake of our community and maintaining the safety of our community, we really want to make sure that if folks are not feeling good, that they're staying home and they're not trying to tough it out. That's really, really crucial and important, and that we need to be asking our kids every single morning, how are you feeling, and checking that out before they come to school. Next slide, please, Thor. So again, as we're the best way to try to keep COVID out of our school is to prevent these outbreaks. And so the first step is that home screening I talked about. The second is as students come in the classroom, our teachers are going to be doing a visual screening just to see if any students are exhibiting a cough or a really runny nose or really looking like they're sweating from a fever as they're walking in. That's tricky with masks on, so it's not a real foolproof process, but we will be doing visual screenings. And then if we do have a student during the day that starts to cough or expresses they're not feeling well or having a sore throat, then Ben or I will come and we'll escort them to what we're calling the Hawk's Nest. And the Hawk's Nest is a place where we can do a little bit more thorough screening of the student. We can do a temperature check. We can really try to figure out in a more in-depth way what's happening with the student. If we get in a place where we do have a student that's feeling sick, when we do that screening, we're going to reach out to you as the parents and ask that you come pick them up right away. We know that the sooner that we can get things addressed and the student can be picked up, the better we can respond. And so if that is the case, we would ask that and recommend that the student go and get a COVID test. And then we would ask that you pass those results on to us so that if there is a positive case of COVID, that we can follow our chain of events to make sure that we're ensuring safety and eliminating the chance for further spread. So let me talk about that here as we move forward. So Thor, next slide, please. So if we do have a positive confirmed case of COVID-19 at school, any student that is in the cohort with that student in class or on the same bus as that student would be placed into a quarantine at home for 10 days. And so if we have a positive case, that would be something that we would be notifying all families in that cohort to make sure that those students did stay home for the next 10 days. If that was the case, we would make sure that we flipped that cohort to 100% online cohort for those 2 weeks so that students could continue to learn from home in quarantine with the same teacher. So that wouldn't impact the education. They would still have class. The difference would just be they wouldn't be in person, but they would instead be back to CDL as we are right now. If a student was not in that same cohort, but maybe had lunch in the same room, the gym, the cafeteria, they would not need to quarantine, excuse me. They would only need to quarantine if they're in that same cohort as the student that was affected. We need to be very, very careful about the information that we share about students. So we wouldn't be revealing the identity of a student that had a positive case or anything about that. That would be something that would be done pretty discreetly and generally, as we need to respect the privacy of all of our students. So that would just be something that you could expect if we did have a positive test or a positive case of COVID-19. Next slide, please, Thor. Ben, that's the COVID-19 kind of rundown. Any questions showing up there in the Q&A or themes that are showing up to address here?
Yeah, sorry, I apologize. I was typing in some of these and didn't totally hear all of what you had informed folks of. There was another question just asking about how will we be informed? Was that covered?
We will be informing. That would most likely be a phone call to everybody in that cohort. So we would want to make personal contact with you to let you know what's going on. We wouldn't be able to share the identity of the student that's affected, but we would want to make sure that we get in touch with you and not just send an email or leave a message. So we would really work to reach out to you to do that. Timing on that is something that we're still figuring out. If a student comes down sick at 9:30 in the morning, that would probably look a little different than if a student comes down sick at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And so we are actually actively working through those scenarios to figure out what that chain would look like and how we would move through that process should that happen at those different times of day.
And did you cover whether or not testing would be available through the school or district?
We will have access to some testing kits, rapid testing kits at school. I am not sure about the guidance in terms of how often we use those or under what conditions we would test a student. We are still seeking guidance, or I'm still seeking guidance about exactly what that would look like, how consent to test would look like with families, so on and so forth. I also know that the testing kits that we have, being rapid tests, may not be as reliable as a test from the doctor. And so, the recommendation if a student is symptomatic or feeling ill at school is going to be that for those parents to go get a real official test. I'm not going to pretend to be a medical professional. I don't think Ben is going to either. But we have gone through some training for how to operate in that hawk's nest to try to monitor symptoms and create a safe space for students until their families can come pick them up.
There's still a lot of questions in the chat here, but I'm not sure if there's any other themes.
Okay, sounds good. Well, let me get through the last chunk here, Ben, and then we can go back and re-examine those questions a little bit if there are themes showing up. All right, next slide here, please, Thor. So again, I want to talk through the choice that all of you have to make starting tonight in Parent View. And so again, you're going to have that choice between hybrid instruction, which is students coming to school 2 days a week, students learning at home 2 days a week, and then having a Wednesday check-in and then learning independently the rest of the day Wednesday. That's going to be one option. The other option, Thor, if you could flip to the next slide, please. The other option is going to be to remain in comprehensive distance learning throughout the year. So as you're making those decisions, let me hop into kind of the implications of those decisions real quick, because there may be some other factors that might help educate that decision for you and your family. So next slide, please, Thor. So our priorities in designing an instructional model for when students come back in person is that we want to make sure students can maintain the same teachers as much as possible. And the model that we've created, we think will allow us to do that. In all honesty, it is a little bit of a numbers game in terms of which families decide to take which route going forward from April 19th. That will help dictate, or that will dictate really what happens with our students and with their teachers. But our priority is to try to make sure students stay with the exact same teachers for the rest of the year. But there are a couple of caveats to that. The first one is that if you chose hybrid in the fall and are going to choose 100% online for the rest of this spring, or if you chose 100% online in the fall and are deciding to choose a hybrid for this spring, there is a probability, I would say a small probability, but there is a potential for your student to change teachers and cohorts. Now, again, we're hoping that doesn't happen, but there is a higher possibility that students could change teachers if they change their selection from the fall. There's also a possibility that students may change teachers even if they stay with the same choice as they did in the fall. Our goal is to not do that, but again, it does come down to a numbers game because we can only have up to 18 students in the classroom. And so when it comes down to that piece, that will drive our process, and we will have to potentially move students around to make sure we're at 18 students in a class. And again, just to reiterate, we have created an instructional model for this return that will hopefully allow us to keep as many students with the exact same teachers as possible. Next slide, please, Thor. What we're going to need all of you to do prior to March 19th is to log into ParentView. And as you log into ParentView, I'll kind of show you a few screenshots here in just a second. But we're going to need you to go in and actually make your choice through ParentView. This window is already open to my understanding, so you can go into ParentView as soon as right now and make that selection. But I want to say there is a possibility that teachers could change even if you make the same choice as you did in the fall. But again, I just want to say again, we're going to try to avoid that as much as possible, but it is a little bit of a numbers game. We're going to ask that between now and next Friday, the 19th, that you go into ParentView and you make that choice so that we can begin the process of trying to put together our schedule to know where students are going to land heading up to April 19th. Next slide, please, Thor. Ben, any new themes showing up?
Not that I know, not that I can identify here.
Perfect. Thor, let's move to the last chunk here. Then I know it's 7:30. If you are interested here, at this point, I'm going to walk you through logistics of what it looks like to go into ParentView. And my screenshots that are going to show up here are blurry, and I apologize for that. But this is what happens when you take a screenshot of a video on YouTube. But I want you to know that up on our website, as of right now, are videos in English and Spanish that walk you through the process for going into ParentView and making your selection. So we do need everyone to complete this process. Even if you're keeping the same choice as August, we do need every single family to go into ParentView and make a new choice by next Friday, the 19th of March. We're going to need you to indicate whether you're choosing hybrid or 100% online school from April 19th forward. We're also going to need to know if you're planning on transporting your child to school or whether they're riding the bus or walking. And we're also going to need to know what you're planning on doing for meals so that we can make sure we have enough meals available for students to pick up as they walk in the building. Next slide, please, Thor. So again, I'm just going to walk you through the steps here. I don't expect anybody to have any of this memorized, but simply just so you can recognize screens and if you're down a rabbit hole in the wrong place, you can go back to this presentation and say, this doesn't look right. So as you log into ParentView, the first step is if you're stuck and you're not quite sure how to log into ParentView on our website, ttsdschools.org/Hazelbrook. There is a link for you to reset your password, and therefore you can do that through your email to go into ParentView if you don't remember what that is. But in the upper right corner of your ParentView screen, there is going to be a button up in the top right corner that I've highlighted there in orange that's going to say online registration. To start this process, you're going to click that button. Next slide, please, Thor. You are then going to go through a series of steps where you're going to end up with a menu to make your selection. But what that starts is you're going to have to select that you are making the choice for hybrid or 100% online and that you're not enrolling your child for the school year. So you want to make sure when you start this process after that first button that you go to that menu and you click you're doing the 2020-2021 hybrid or 100% online registration process. Next, please, Thor. At that point, it's going to ask all of your parents, and again, I apologize, this is so blurry, but you're going to have to update parent contact information, address, phone numbers, and things like that until both of those are complete. You'll get those green boxes that are there on the right side of your screen, and then you'll press save and continue to move to the place where you get to make your selection for hybrid or 100% online. Next slide, please, Thor. As you get to the point, your student menu will show up. you'll need to press that edit button on the left side where my arrow is indicating there. And then that will get to the menu where you'll be able to make your choice. You'll also notice that in yellow on the right there, it says in progress. Once you've made your choice, that will go to green to say that you've finished the process. So Thor, if you could go to the next screen there, please. You will get the next menu you'll see when you press edit will be this one that allows you to pick between hybrid or 100% online. Once you've made that choice, you'll press save and continue, and that will take you to finishing up the final process. Thor. You'll be taken to another menu that asks you to indicate what transportation is going to be needed for your child. That's pretty self-explanatory, I hope. Next, please, Thor. You'll also indicate whether you're planning on having a grab and go meal at lunch as students come into their designated lunch area. I think I did see a question earlier about, is that going to be a hot lunch? The answer is yes. There'll be warm lunches that are bagged up for students to take one at a time. It's not all cold lunch. So students will have a hot lunch when they get in. It will just be bagged up to prevent from transmitting any germs. And so you'll indicate whether you're planning on receiving a lunch from us or both breakfast and lunch, or if you're bringing your own sack lunch from home. Next, please, Thor. And once you've done that, you'll get that green box on the right of your screen next to your child's name that says the process is complete. You'll press save and continue, and the enrollment is done, and that information has been transmitted to us so we can start making plans for April 19th. Next slide, please, Thor. And that's it. So you'll see that final box will say success. It's done. You've made your choice. And we thank you for doing that for us so we can start making plans. Next slide, please, Thor. Just a couple more things here. Again, I want to say the deadline to do this is by next Friday, March 19th. We need to make sure that everyone has that done by 4 o'clock on that afternoon as everyone departs for spring break. That way we can start making those shifts immediately after spring break. Hopefully no shifts, but if there are shifts, we can start planning those. Next, please, Thor. If you do need help with the process of going into Parent View and making those choices, we have all sorts of folks that are standing by in our main office to help you. So if you get stuck at any time between the hours of 8 o'clock and 4 o'clock, please give us a call. We're happy to walk you through that. There's also videos that are up on our website that will walk you through the process. We don't want you sitting at home trying to guess your way through this unless you want to. And so please reach out to us. We stand by prepared to help you do that for us so that we can get that information. Next slide, please, Thor. And I think for us, that wraps us up for tonight. I see that there are quite a few questions there in the Q&A. We're going to stick around here for a couple of minutes and try to answer a few of those. I don't think we're going to be able to get through all 37 of the questions that are showing up in the box on my end, but we are populating a frequently asked questions document that you can click on from our website. And if we see common themes in those questions, we will definitely populate that FAQ document and make sure we have answers that are ready for you. So please, if you're waiting for a question there in the Q&A, we'll stick around here for probably 10 more minutes or so and answer as many of those as we can. But really appreciate your partnership in this. We know this is a brand new thing. We know this is different and not how we imagine school for any of us. And so we appreciate your grace and your partnership. And we know that we can all do this together. And we're really excited to have students coming back with us. We look forward to it. All of us are in this business because we love kids. And we get to see them again, which is super exciting. But it also is something where we're going to need to do things differently. So please get in there, make that registration choice here in the next week and a half. And I appreciate you joining us tonight. Thank you so much. At this point, we're going to kind of go on mute here and we'll respond to as many of those questions as we can in the Q&A. But thanks again for coming and have a great night.